So we're very happy to have Mr. William Harris here today. And Bill was supposed to be here last year, but we had an unfortunate occurrence.
Do I remember? Do I want to remember?
Well, does anybody remember when all our national parks were closed down for a little bit?
Oh, yeah.
Anybody remember that? Yeah? So what happened was Bill was supposed to be doing a presentation on the Sunday. And he called me on the Friday and he said, guess what's just happened? I walked out my office. I can't get to anything. So fast forward, we are very happy to have Bill here today. So I'm going to pass the mic over to him. Let me just tell you a little bit about him. He is the director of the Franklin D. Roosevelt Presidential Library and Museum. And he is focused in building collaborative relationships with the library's on-site partner, the National Park Service, and with the Roosevelt Institute. And Bill holds a Master of Arts degree in history and a Bachelor of Arts degree in English and history. So I'm not going to keep on going because his resume is pretty long and he's done some absolute wonderful things. So I'm going to pass it to him so he can tell you all about FDR.
Oh, that's a big one. Thank you. And can you hear that? Because I know that either I'm very loud or I mumble. So thank you. And it was last year, and I have to say I block out that 6-7 weeks that we didn't work. It was sort of a practice for retirement. We all called it dress rehearsal because, it's against the law for us to work during that period, to look at our email or even answer the phone or represent the library. So it's wonderful to get to be here on a beautiful day like this, and it's not 900 degrees and smelling like smoke, and you're not seeing through my shirt, which wouldn't be a pretty sight. It is a real pleasure to be here. I've been at the library now for almost 11 years. First as the deputy, and one of my colleagues is right out here, and who worked almost the whole time that I've been there. And it's just been a thrill to go from deputy to the director. And I also get the fun right now of being the acting director of the Bill Clinton Library out in Little Rock. So if I'm distracted and I just start talking about a different train tour than the one that George Bush took in '92, because I helped start that library and I know more about that, then just forgive me. It'll be somebody's train ride somewhere, and it'll involve presidents. So they're more similar than you might think behind the scenes. So I am going to base this around slides. So you'll pardon me if I sometimes have to crook my neck or if it's a little slow. The first point I wanted to make was, I know in the announcement it said that historian William Harris. Well, I am most certainly not a historian. I am an archivist. And there's a big distinction. It makes no sense to any of you all, but it is an important distinction because what we do is preserve and make available the materials so that historians and others can use them. And now, we certainly, my background in graduate school was more archives than history, but we work with historians, and we certainly know how to interpret materials and find them. But what we really know how to do is explore archival materials, understand their connections and relationships, and how they'll share, and how they can provide insight into a person and into their actions. So when I talk about railroads or trains today, really, in many ways, I'm talking about it through the lens of what's at the FDR Library. This is going to be my first test. See, Oh, there we go. It's going to be slow, so you'll get a lot of me awkwardly feeling nervous. So many people know that we have exhibits open to the public. And that's been the case since June 30th, 1941, when FDR opened the museum to the public, when it was given over to the National Archives. And so, but that's only a piece. The reason that we really exist at all is because of the archives. The archives are the heartbeat. And when I say the archives, I'm going to mean anything about holdings, also the artifact holdings and our audiovisual holdings. But the archives holds everything that documents the president of the Roosevelt's family from the 1600s, really, onward, as well as all the White House files, because all of that was personal property at the time, and was all the way through Jimmy Carter, and as well as materials from his campaigns, and Eleanor Roosevelt's papers, members of his cabinet, and so forth. 17 million pages worth of papers. So that's where this is drawn, and that's where the books that are based on FDR are drawn, and that's where stories about railroad or anything that I'll talk about today is drawn. So now I'll look at my notes since I won't read from up there. Obviously, I'll set some context for rail travel. It was vital. It was the only way that people could travel long distances at that time to conduct business in any sort of reasonable or sensible way. Even into the 40s, roads weren't always reliable. Of course, it would take a lot of time to take highways. There were no interstates or freeways. So rail travel took you from city to city through the countryside, and you could reach major cities and rural cities. There were, of course, airplanes came along in the 30s and some passenger routes, but FDR was not a flyer. He only flew internationally when he did. It also provided a means that for his aides or for family or anyone to travel with him, and it was opportunities when they would stop at different places to meet with local political officials and other supporters, and to just observe general conditions as the train rolled along. FDR loved that about riding the train, and that you got this opportunity to see the country in a very different way even than people today when we fly all over the country and to stop, and never really are on the ground, especially in smaller communities. Let's see. And over the years, of course, as technology changed and as the complexities of the presidency changed, the trains became little rolling White Houses with the full communications and security and all the support services that were necessary. Cars would even be shipped by train, not necessarily the presidential train. Just like today, the presidential cars are shipped ahead of time, usually on a separate airplane to be there when they arrive. And since I helped start a more modern presidential library, it is interesting to see how things have evolved, but also to see how there are certain similarities that continue just about the logistics around moving a president around, not secret stuff about how you time it and who's where and what kind of security, but just the notion of getting this huge retinue of people here and there all over the place, and how that has to be scheduled. I'll get to some of that in just a bit. And so you'll see these multiple reasons that people would use the trains. There we go. So as you can see, the 1920 campaign was his first really national, well, it was the first of his 5 times on the ticket. I always ask this trivia question. Who was the other president on a national ticket 5 times, either as president or vice president? Anybody? 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 Richard Nixon. So, he lost the first 1920, the vice presidential nomination, but it gave him his first real national exposure in communities, not just with like business clubs he would go speak at, when he was in President Wilson's cabinet, but as an individual running for office. And he made over 800 speeches. He went all the way to the West Coast, visited 41 states. He visited over 30 states. And so it was quite an undertaking, youthful, energetic. This was before polio. And so it was just a real opportunity for him as someone who had ambition, but not only to win the election, but also someone who was thinking about his political future. So train travel, then as in now, came with its risks. Chiefly collisions with pedestrians and automobiles. It's remarkable when you look at newspapers of that era, how many people managed to get their car on a train track and not get out of the way. It seemed to happen frequently. And what's very fascinating, and I didn't know this, and if we did know it, we had long forgotten it at the library, but the president's uncle, Warren Delano, was killed during the 1920 campaign when his little wagon, horse-drawn carriage, his horse ran wild onto the tracks at Barrytown, and he was hit by a train and killed. I did not know that. And so the funeral was up at Steam Valletta, the mansion there that's still there, right near the Kingston Rhinecliff Bridge, and he's buried up here. So I did not know that. So, and FDR actually came back from the campaign to attend the funeral. He was very close to his Delano uncles. And yeah, so again, the types of dangers. Now, we love that headline on the top one. FDR's train has essentially killed someone, is in essence. But what the headline doesn't say, the article does, is it was actually a freight train that hit the person, and his car was attached to a passenger train that stopped and picked up the injured people and carried them to the next stop. So the headline is from a paper that was, and this is very real, and I'm not being political, but it was from a conservative newspaper. So the headline says one thing, the article says the other. And you see that in both directions, so that's not one way or the other right there. Sometimes it's comforting that things never change or that stay the same. Okay. Yeah, well, you got to sleep at night. So 1932, though, was a campaign unlike any he had certainly ever done. He got the nomination in the summer in August of 1932, and he was, close advisors, his vice presidential nominee said, go do a front porch campaign. You're going to win. Anything you do can just screw it up. Just go do your old-fashioned, let people come to you, give a few radio remarks, release some statements. And he was like, well, of course not, because that just wasn't FDR to begin with. And also, he thought that the Times called for engagement with people directly. He felt that was certainly a strong suit of his ability to campaign, as well as what the people, he felt, needed from their leadership, because times were very tough. And it was evident that there was, unease, more than unease, frankly, in many places, desperation about the place the nation was in economically. Also, there was great fear. One reason to not send him was there was so much unrest. There was a greater fear of that violence could potentially erupt around the country because of the unsettled conditions. So he gave his first major address in Columbus, Ohio, actually, on August 19th or 20th. Actually, my great-great-grandfather, who was an elected official in Ohio, was there for that event, and there's a picture of him off to the side. So it's kind of in Columbus. He was about to become the director of public safety there in Columbus, Ohio. I'm from Alabama and didn't really know that until this past year during my forced retirement in the fall, and I did some family research on my mother's people from Ohio. Voila, there's even papers from him in the library. Had no idea. So of course, the Columbus Starts the 32 campaign. I'm gonna throw out my family member who was there. I don't think I would have liked him very much, but he seems like he was very stern, very, very stern. Although he did believe in international engagement, you can't keep me off a plane overseas. So the rear platform obviously became the stage setting for these stops. And whistle stops, he wasn't the first one to do it. Of course, presidents had done them before, but in terms of just the sheer scale of it and the amount of miles covered in such a short period of time, it was unprecedented in many ways. What you'll see here is how close the crowds would get. They would be on the rail sidings or either at the train station on the stop. Of course, trains around had to be stopped. Now, this would have been a privately paid for train and rail car that would have been provided by the railroad company, and he would have been on those lines, but would not have any of the protections that of presidential train. Security paid for privately would have gone ahead and made sure the tracks, looked at bridges, just to make sure everything was okay. Presidential nominees did not get Secret Service coverage at the time. That did not come until after President Kennedy was shot. And then Robert Kennedy then was shot while campaigning for president. So later that would come. So at that point, it was really up to the candidate and the candidates in the party or his campaign to fund that kind of security. So what did that number say? 7. So let's go to 8. I'm actually trying to be organized, which my staff, I wish they were here. Melissa, that's like a huge undertaking. She used to try to do it. It's going to be persnickety. There we go. So what I love about this picture, if you can see it, I hope you can see it well. This picture captures everything about what it was like to run for president and make a stop on the train. This is the Roosevelt campaign special on the West Coast portion of the tour, which proved immensely successful and was essential. At that point, those states tended to go Republican, and it was essential for, if there was any chance to win, for him to carry California especially. Wilson knew that. Wilson, that was the famous election night where Lodge went to bed thinking he had won California and woke up to find California had gone to Wilson, and Wilson won the election. So winning the West was essential. So in this photograph, what you have from this train event is you'll have bands that would come out and play generally. And it didn't matter where you were, people would turn out to see the candidate. Because, you know, it was a big deal. It's just there was no television. Radio coverage, though there was 2 national radio networks at the time, NBC and CBS. Still, though, people were tuned in, but it wasn't the same as actually seeing someone. And probably some of us remember, I certainly do, when the president came, when I was a child down to Alabama. And it's just, it was a different feeling. It was like, wow, and the president's coming, you know, that's a big deal. So in this picture, what you have here is on the platform, you see Jim Farley over on the left. He managed the campaign, and he would become the Postmaster General. He's sort of like quieting the crowd over here like this. And then you've got the microphones set up and giant speakers on the top of the train, as you see. Radio microphones, multiple radio microphones. And what you have, and I'll get to this in a minute, is FDR. He's standing casually. He's got a hand in his pocket. He's holding himself with one of the uprights on the train car, but his son is right there in the background, ready to step forward if he needed to. Over on the right side of the photo, you've got other candidates from California running for Democratic office, including William McAdoo running for Senate, who was Wilson's son-in-law. So again, you know, everybody knows everybody, but this presidential train was an opportunity to also promote other candidates running for office. And in the crowd, which I love, they're right up. You can see them all along the side of the train as far back as you can go. And they're all the way up to the platform. You see somebody's holding their child up on their shoulders so they can get a good view. And, of course, we know the outcome now, and we know how dramatic the outcome was in terms of the victory. But there was a sense no presidential election or anyone with any brains would ever assume that anyone has ever got it in the bag. So they certainly, you know, you just didn't know. But there was everyone talks about how electric it felt, how just the differences between the campaigns were even, and I'm not going to, you know, fight the 1932 campaign with Herbert Hoover or, you know, his style as a campaigner, but it was a dramatically different style. In fact, I'll quote this from the Sacramento stop. The conductor on that trip, William Morley, who spent 47 years as a conductor on that line, said it was the single most memorable day and run of his entire 47-year career. The crowds were just that, they just surged around. And that must have been something. And they lined even the train car in between stops so that they could see the Roosevelt special go by. Is that a different one? Oh, yeah. So the press, of course, would be on board. And lacking television, you would see some newsreels people could on the weekend. What you would get in the weekend's rotogravure section, which was the picture section of big newspapers, there would usually be these spreads, whereas the editorial pages may not. In the big city newspapers, largely many big city newspapers were very conservative and were not Democratic Party supporters or Roosevelt. But inevitably, the rotogravure sections would carry photos, and the photos themselves would tell a story of enthusiastic crowds. The photo didn't need a caption because you could look at them and say, wow, there's a lot going on there. And so it was another way for voters to see and connect what was going on the train and with these train tours. Let's see. Oh, and there we have 2 more pictures. Help me out. Slide. Okay. I'm just trying to see what my slide is. You see again that he can engage with people and with the press more directly. You see how he's holding himself up, and in the picture down on the right, he's actually got his cane in his hand as he holds on to the upright. And then they're posing for a picture. Joe Kennedy, the president's father, is in the crowd down front in that photo wearing glasses. We don't know what they're posing for, though, but they're posing. Maybe just, for a local newspaper. They're listening probably to a band. Whoops, there we go. We got that one again. Let's see. And there, mobility. Of course, we have to talk about that. There is recently, I don't know if any of you went to the talk at the library from the National Park Service's Mellon Fellow about this notion of the secret wheelchair-bound paralytic president. It wasn't that secret. It was more just not talked about. And of course, whatever the engagement with the press may have been, we cannot find documentation that shows they told the press you can't take pictures of X, Y, or Z. Did that conversation probably occur? Yeah, but there was no way that you couldn't stop people from taking photos. And what we're finding now, and YouTube's a wonderful thing, people are putting their home movies and things up online. And you see the president moving from his car even to a podium. Now, again, limited audiences of the time, but here they would put down this special ramp. He would clutch hold to each side and swing himself down. He would just toss his legs down, and he would come back up on the train the same way in front of everyone. Even local papers would carry a picture like this. So, and ahead of time, especially in the presidential years, a whole team would be sent. Local people would be hired, lumber would be purchased, and they would build whole platforms for his car to drive up on, or special ramps for him to use that you would then see him using, and he would never even get out of a car. It wasn't a secret, really. It just wasn't discussed, or widely even, people knew he had an illness. The idea was to project vigor, because it wasn't that the paralysis or the limited mobility, because he's clearly mobile, it was a sign of weakness at the time. That was just our culture that was broadly felt. And so the idea was to overcome that and show that you're vigorous, and the way to do that was to be able to physically move yourself. Obviously, he had limitations. Obviously, he required a wheelchair, and in some stops where he couldn't do that, you just wouldn't see him. He wouldn't get off the train, or, you would not see him get on the train. In some campaign stops, we just were given a radio recording from a Rochester station, actually, a full live remote. We don't have many of those because they usually didn't keep them. From a local Rochester station where the guy's introducing, he's describing the crowd, and then they're waiting for the president's train, and the president's train gets there. And if you look at pictures from the paper at the time, the crowd goes all the way up through the Rochester downtown. It's just filled with people. And the radio announcer, they have trouble. They're having trouble, there's a delay. And because the train was trying to get lined up just right so he could come off the train without having to use assistance or show that he was in a wheelchair. So again, it's public relations more than it's keeping a secret, because it's hard to keep that a secret. I mean, why is he moving that way, right? Because he can't walk down the train normally, like people who have no mobility issues can. So it's interesting research. It's, it's a debate, but I think it's a different way to kind of think of it and look at it sometimes, which is fun. So, security on a presidential train in 1932, as I said, it was out there. There were attempts to sabotage tracks. They caught them. It wasn't widespread. It wasn't deep. It was fairly easily catchable. The New York Daily News was a conservative newspaper, and so that headline covers another story about FDR that's very positive. So it's fascinating also to see how the headlines are playing out on papers. That's actually, at the end of the day, wasn't a very big news story because it wasn't exactly that. But nevertheless, there were those types of incidents. And as you see, in November, before the election, the Secret Service is already prepared when he wins to step in and begin to provide coverage. Until the moment that they knew he had won the election, there was no Secret Service coverage whatsoever. Okay, so let me move my notes up. So what you have now, he becomes president. Now the world does change, because when you're president, everything changes. All the logistics, everything has to be managed in an entirely different way. The top image is a rail car that belonged to President Harding. Of course, he died on a railroad tour when he was out in San Francisco, and he used this Pullman car at top. Down below is a set of Pullman cars called the Explorer series that were created by the Pullman Company, and that was the primary company that made rail cars, especially rail cars for passengers, and they provided service, Pullman porters, as well as food service for trains, and almost really a monopoly that was later broken. But this Explorer series of cars were built in 1927, and they were designed for executives and for people who needed to move about, the wealthier executives, and they were named after explorers. And it is these cars, when we talk about presidential train, I'm going to often refer to the car. Marco Polo's was the car he frequently used, and it would be attached to a train. That would be the presidential train, but often the car becomes the name of the train. Oh, he's on the Marco Polo. So, but the presidential train itself would be 6, 8, 10 cars, depending on the length, with this being the final car on the train with the platform in the rear. You see it has an observation room in the back. It has a series of staterooms or compartments. It has a dining room, and then various services to be provided by the rail line. Let's see, the extra cars would be for the press. The press would have a car. Other people in the presidential party, baggage, security, and communications. Of course, still relatively, those support services rudimentary at that time. And so I think it's already, though, interesting to see the transition from this previous car, which offered a lot of the same things, but it didn't provide as much flexibility as how they later outfitted this train in terms of already the ability of even an executive to communicate with people, to have staff around him, and to function while he was on train. Let's see. I don't think I've got a picture of this. Now here's some support cars. These are later photos, but those are two that would be on the train in the 30s and 40s, and were used all the way through the Eisenhower administration. Actually, into early Kennedy years, communications and other equipment like that would sometimes be shipped by the train car ahead of time, even early Kennedy, until that was done away with, and that was also by plane. And there you see a press car in 1948 on the train that carried the Magellan. I'll get to that. It wasn't outfitted that way initially in Roosevelt's era, but it gives you a sense of how these Pullman cars could be adapted for multiple uses so they could follow their stories and get the story out. So, move over here. Let's see if I missed anything. I want to make sure, because there's some, okay. Oh, and just in terms too, I find this fascinating. The presidential train would travel on rail lines owned by the private rail companies around the country. So, but the presidential train would take precedence. If they were going somewhere, it would usually be, it would be scheduled and everything would have to be planned, but the line had to be cleared for the train, either freight or passenger, and there had to be sort of a hold as the president was going through an area, and then of course there had to be security. The train cars were provided by the rail companies. The Pullman cars, the passenger cars that were used by press or the other members of the staff, people would either be billed on a per ticket basis, and sometimes the rail would just charge a flat rate for the use of a train and its time on for travel. So it wasn't, like you're at the airport and you get on your government plane and you fly off from a single. It was so much more complicated than getting a runway at an airport like it is now. And if you've ever been to an airport, if they're not landed at a military base, especially if the vice president has traveled, it changes sort of the way people come in and out of the airport, but not as in a dramatic way as sort of the train required everybody to step aside so this train could go by. Trains lacking that sort of a degree of flexibility. And then, of course, if he was spending any time somewhere, the train had to be sided somewhere. You had to park the train and keep it secure while he was not on board. So let's see. Now, let's get us up here now. So the president, there would never have been any thought that he would not come back home during his presidency. And as you see, 137 times there were direct trips from Washington here, another 75 times where he was coming from somewhere else and he had to make the connection through to here. It seems so easy, doesn't it, that you get on the train in Washington at Union Station and, you know, you come up here. Well, many of us have done it. I've done it so many times I can't count. And you get off the train, you know, here in Poughkeepsie, and you just motor right on up to your house. It obviously wasn't like that. And until I looked, I don't think I realized how complicated it really was, and the planning. Now, because he was in office so long, did it take on a degree of routine? Sure. But nevertheless, you couldn't assume certain things because it is security, and it's the Secret Service's job to not assume things and to make sure that the president's protected along the way. So I want to, okay, good. Usually when the president was coming up here, the train would leave from Union Station at night, usually after 10 o'clock. He liked to travel overnight so he could sleep. You're not losing a day either. And so they'd leave. He did not like to ride a fast train. He wanted his train usually around 35 miles per hour, hence an overnight train from Washington to here. When you're out west, sometimes and during the war, it would go faster because the distances were open and bright. But he did not like. He loved train travel. I don't know. Are there train travel lovers out there? I love train travel. I've been across the country twice on sleepers, and all through Europe on sleepers. There is something just wonderful about going to sleep on a train and rocking along or stopping at some godforsaken place at 3 a.m. and looking out of the window, where are you, you know, and or going over the mountains and it gets cold on the train and you wonder why. But he loved it. He loved being on that train. So what would happen is it would then arrive up here around 6 a.m. sometimes. Sometimes they would hold so it could come in here a little later in the morning. And usually on the western route, so I would say probably 80% of the time, it came up and went up the western side of the Hudson River. And they parked the train at Highland, and he disembarked in his party, and they drove them across and over here. Sometimes, though, that could not happen, and they would come up on the eastern side. I'll get to that in a moment. But there were occasions during the war where they would then bring him over here via the train to disembark, and sidings were built down below the house up here in Hyde Park. They were not used a great deal, though. So while the train wasn't being used, it was being protected by guards 24 hours a day around it, so that no one, you know, would sabotage the train, and ensure that at any notice it could be ready for him to go again. So it always had to be ready so that the president could go. Just, you know, the emergencies occur. He needs to move. He would change his mind. I mean, presidents are people. Although he was very aware of the complexities it takes. Even modern presidents are aware of the complexities it takes. It sometimes is not as easy as just stopping what you're doing. You see, I'll just go back to that terrible day in 9/11 when the president flew it to multiple parts of the country. Plans don't change that quickly. And when they do, the amount of security issues that then become even more paramount, not to mention the crisis of that point, they become larger and larger and larger. So let's do a few logistics about getting up there. I'm sorry the documents aren't as visible, but these are from the archives. I've just picked a random trip of September 8th, 1939, of the president coming to Hyde Park. So what you see here is months in advance. They've already begun formulating that there would be a trip. The trip seems so like, I'm going to Hyde Park this weekend. But you knew that 4 months ago or 5 months, right? Because they're planning. And sometimes it would shift a day or so, but they're planning. And then they list the people. That's early. Those are White House, that's smaller White House memo pad paper where guests are being listed who might be on there. Now, what would then happen is then a more formal itinerary would be created where they would list the service personnel on the cars, on the train, as well as the what Secret Service agents would join them on the train as well. What's interesting too is the staff of the train, including the porters and meal service folks, and the conductor, the engineer, everyone, were provided by the rail company. So, and usually a rail company representative would ride on the train as well. So the B&O, Baltimore and Ohio, was the tracks on the western side. So that it was usually a Baltimore and Ohio crew and representative when they were coming up here. And so the porters, the Pullman porters, who were known for their professionalism and how the quality of their service, they would pick the best ones who would ride on the presidential trains and on the presidential specials, and it was considered obviously quite an honor to serve on the president's train. Now the president would carry his own; he would have his own valet who would help him, of course, with his needs. And sometimes might be a Navy steward or someone who would travel as well, who would help the president personally, because he obviously had his own personal needs that he needed assistance for. So let's go next. So, and I'm sorry those documents are not rendering correctly, and I don't know why. I think it's on my end. So, but it doesn't get around what you see, and I'll explain. On the right, what you see then is what the Secret Service has to do. They've got to check in. There has to be a check-in every so many miles of where there's contact saying the train's passed, it's on time, and that's radioed back to Washington. And so these are people not on the train, but who are off the train, checking in back to D.C., showing that it's on schedule, it's where it's supposed to be. And you will see in the other one, one of the other memos shows there were only 4 stops between here and New Jersey where actual hardline telephone could be used. So those are noted. And at those points, the Secret Service would use the telephone then to check in and make sure that everyone knew that that went fine, that telephone communication was working. For the trip up on the Baltimore and Ohio line for this one, not for all of them, but for some, they would change crews, or either there would be service provided in New Jersey, and at that point the train would start over again, and there would be a new document for that showing the check-in points where it needed to occur. Now, the document on the bottom left, I hate that it's not showing, because I just found that yesterday. I sent a picture to Shirley, or who texted me. Who was it that texted me? You. And with me with a box open, because I got to thinking, I want to pull something from the Secret Service. So I went to our old Secret Service files, rarely used, and found this really unusual little memo. It looks like a telegram. You all know telegram, and but it's not a telegram, and but it is an exact phone transcript of the part of Washington calling Philadelphia Secret Service office and saying that the president may want to use the phone, the actual landline phone when he gets to Philadelphia. We've assigned agents to, they know that. But what you're getting is even the operator. It says, call from Philadelphia, and you can hear the operator, hold please. That's all on this document. And it says collect call. And it says, sorry, circuit's busy, try again. Because those of us older know, I'm from rural Alabama, where we had to call an operator to make long-distance calls into the 1980s. So I more than appreciate that it's just not as easy as picking up the phone. So, and you go through this whole conversation where they're letting it know, and they say the agent's name. It's like you're listening to a telephone call. And the only thing I can assume, no one at the library, because I called around last night, what the heck is this document? We just had never looked at this. This is just one of those kind of detritus pieces of, at the library. It's important, it's cool as it can be. It really shows something, but it's just not a document that's been paid a lot of attention to, right? And that's the beauty of these archives, is the different stories that you can continue to find in them. So what we know is Henry Morgenthau, who's Secretary of the Treasury, which oversees the Secret Service, and he was also a neighbor. Morgenthau's are up here from Dutchess County. He liked to have someone on the phone, FDR did not. He wanted full transcripts. He wanted to be able to refer back to them. We've got them at the library. They're amazing. They're spectacular because you can see the conversation you normally wouldn't have. And we just wonder if that was part of the practice at the Treasury for them on these things. I don't know. It would take other research. I've just never seen a document like that, and no one else at the library has either. You know, be a real dork that I am as an archivist. And so, but you just see the complexities there then. And again, this is doing that again, so I'm sorry. But at the top right, what you're seeing then is the answer to that says everything went fine in Philadelphia. All good. Telephone worked, moving on. This would happen 4 times a stop with the phones, and the check-ins would occur through the trip for every single trip. Not just to Hyde Park, but anywhere else he went, all over the country. So again, logistically, something that seems so simple would be fun. And now the president, who had a sort of wicked sense of humor at times, sometimes he would never have purposefully put anyone in a spot. But if he knew something was about to happen, I'll give you an example. When the war started and there was there was a blackout siren for a test in D.C. as they were leaving, they all had to pull the shades down on the train. Hard to believe the shades weren't down on a president's train at night with the lights on, with him going on the tracks, but again, different era. They pulled them down, but he noted that the front headlight on the train was still on. And he said, I wonder how long it'll take the boys to figure that one out. And so no one was getting in trouble. He just thought it was humorous that here they are pulling their shades down and the whole train is lighted from the head. Because he hated the security aspect of this, couldn't stand it. Appreciated they had job to do, but he never wanted as much coverage as he had, ever. And then I'll close this section with just the logistics you don't think about. So mail didn't stop. So this is just one trip, again, leaving in the evening, going up here. And that's just the first page of the mail report of what's coming to the train. They were going to drop the pouch at Silver Spring. If you know D.C., that's still right there. It's just on the border with the district. So they were a car would have dropped a pouch with this mail list and mail there. There would have been one on the train when he left. So, and this would happen a couple of more times at various stops in the D.C. metropolitan area. And so it's just a list of all the mail that you're going to need to sign tonight, letters you want to read. It goes on for multiple pages. And you see the check marks and stuff on there where they had worked their way through it on the train that night or the next morning. So that's the sort of just the business that keeps going, again, with the rolling White House. There would be, the pouch would have we've got them. They're all kept in that order by folders by trip of everything he would have seen on that train trip that would have been signed, that would have gone back, and so forth. So it's, again, fascinating just to see how it's working and how the White House just kind of rolls with them. They just move the operation onto the train, and it just keeps going. And then the one on the right is actually a memo where they're asking the rail line whether the western side is open after a landslide that had occurred, because the landslides occur on that side from the Palisades, especially down there. And so they're asking, is it okay? It's rained a lot. Maybe we shouldn't take the western line. It'd be safer to take the eastern side of the track. So those kind of communications were going on, too, by the Secret Service all along the time beforehand. So just the movement of the president back and forth, I'm fascinated by. And I had never looked into this. This is new to me, into learning about it. And I just find it quite fascinating about how it would work. Let's see. Got to move up. Let's see. Moving up to 20, the Marco Polo. So during the early years of the president's administration, they adopted the use of that executive series car named after, there were 6 or 7 of them named after explorers. The Marco Polo was his favorite. So was the Amundsen, named after the polar explorer. And so, let's see. It's now, you can actually go through it. Those are contemporary pictures. It's on display in Georgia at the Southeastern Railroad Museum. If you ever get a chance to see these things, go. They're fascinating because you actually get to walk through the car and you can really appreciate the size and scale and the way one moved about. And again, this is the decor from 1927 style. You see it reflects even interior, heavily wooded panel, the dining room, sitting area, and various support services. I always show facilities because everyone wants to go tour in a big mansion facilities. They are fascinating because that is not a standard bathroom on a Pullman car at the time. And that was adjusted so that President Roosevelt could utilize it. It was immediately adjacent to his room. I love that it actually has tile too, ceramic tile. If you've ever been on a compartment in a more contemporary train, and I mean by contemporary the last 40 years, there is no tile. It's a terrible space that is just a necessity and in your little compartment. And then on the right, you see a more traditional Pullman car, where that's how you'd sit during the day. The bottom seats would form a bed. The top one would be pulled down from the top. And so then the curtain would be pulled, and people would sleep top or bottom. The press more often would ride that way. Senior staff or really special visitors would be in a sleeper car that had compartments. So again, just giving you a sense of what it would have been like to rumble along at 35 miles per hour with the president. And so here on the Marco Polo, what we see is the president meeting with members of the press, the traveling press corps. They were with him, just like today. The press traveled with the president in their own car. He would let them in sometimes, speak to them. But the train gave him a real opportunity, though, to say, this is great national press, and speak directly to local press when they came into a local facility. And like all politicians, it doesn't matter what party or who they are, they like to talk to who they like to talk to. And they certainly like to make their points more as directly as they can without as much filtration as possible. And then you see him over on the right sitting with his cousin Laura Delano, who lived up here, between near Statsburg, who was kind of a lunatic. She had purple hair and said all sorts of awful things constantly. And she probably would have been a lot of fun to travel with, which is why he wanted her. She bred like really high-strung setters, and she'd often have one on the train, and she would just hand them off to the Secret Service to walk at the stop. She was really impossible. So I'm sure everyone hated her. Well, in fact, I'm going to say this, everyone hated her. It's pretty clear. But he liked having her around, along with Daisy Suckley from up at Wilderson. He loved having her on board, too. And then you see again, this is more, there aren't as many pictures of him on the next train I'll talk about, but here we go again, playing cards, doing some work, just, taking a moment to relax on the train, especially on long distances. The president did have this ability to disconnect. He would turn his brain off from work. While it was turned off, he would focus on what he was doing, and then he would turn it back on. You see it at the library. You see it the way the library physically is constructed, the details, if any of you, an opportunity for me to take you behind the scenes to see how he designed it, which he did, and the amount of time he spent on things he was interested in. Even if it's playing cards, that's a half hour, I'm playing cards. He's recharged, goes back to the business at hand. Now, let's have dinner. What we have a lot of, too, are just what it was like to be on the train. Food was an important part of rail travel. I can't stress enough how important it was to the rail lines. Those companies running the big passenger trains and lines, they were highly competitive. They weren't the most profit-making parts, obviously, of running a train system, but they were the prestige part. And it's how the public often knew of a rail line more so than their freight operations. And they prided their food service. And so, again, whatever line you were on, you got their food service that was known for that company, what they provided. And these menus, as you can see, were extensive. So I'll take a moment, since it's small, just to read through a couple of details. This one is just a quick jaunt down to Williamsburg. You see the picture in the middle. On October 20th, 1934, they made a souvenir menu showing a Williamsburg menu for this one trip. The rail line did, Norfolk and Southern, Chesapeake and Ohio lines. So they served breakfast on board because the train left early. And so for breakfast you could have, mind you, fruits, jams, and cereals for 25 cents each. Fish, broiled or fried, for breakfast, that's your call, seems weird to me, 75 cents. Eggs and omelets, 40. Steaks, chops, other meats, 40 to 75 cents. Though calf's liver with bacon was 90 cents. bread and griddle cakes, 35 cents. A pot of coffee or tea, 20 to 25 cents. So, because press and some people traveling in the party who weren't like White House staff members in the immediate party, they had to pay for their own food. And the railroad would also charge back those costs because they're keeping account of what you're eating, even the president's party. This is the president's train. And they're going to bill that back to the White House or the campaign, depending, to pay for it. They're not, providing free services to the president's party. I don't think I'd ever even thought about that. So for longer trips, such as this one to Chicago right here, again, they would create a souvenir menu generally. This one's on the Chicago and Northwestern Railway. It also included on the left, you'll see compartment dining, where you could order your meal, turn it in the night before, or maybe in the morning, to the conductor or your porter, your sleeping car porter, and then they would bring you breakfast the next morning. And actually, if you do overnights, that's still really the way it works. The food's horrific, but they'll bring it to your car if you want it to, and you fill your little form out. So sort of vaguely feels old-fashioned or like a drive-through. I hate to knock them. They do their best, but it's not this. That's for sure. For this light lunch, you could have a fruit cocktail or consomme, and then move on to some lamb chops, chicken fricassee, or dumplings. Then you could have a tongue sandwich. Everybody wants a tongue sandwich. You could choose from au gratin potatoes, succotash, salads, breads, and an assortment of cakes, cobblers, and cheese plates. And finally, what we all want on a train, let's see, right here, what you're going to get also is your midnight luncheon. So, yeah, right, you need your midnight luncheon. So if the train left at night, which they frequently did, you could get a little snack before you went to bed. And that little snack could include a lobster salad, because that's what I want at 10:30 at night. A Melba toast with ice cream and coffee for $1. And this is on the New York Central line, which ran the 20th Century Limited, which was, that was the top tier right there. If you didn't want lobster, you could just have club sandwiches or something like that. Of course, wine, beer, and liquor were all available at cost. Usually not served in the diner, but could be brought. The president would travel frequently with his own booze because he wasn't going to pay railroad prices. There is a markup. And so what was fascinating about that is the children's hour, some of you may have heard of, where he would host cocktails in the evening. He wasn't really a drinker, maybe a drink at night, where he would use a bottle of good liquor, a bottle empty of the good liquor, filled with the bad bathtub gin, and he would mix his notoriously bad, where he would skimp on the vermouth, and you would get a little drunk fast, and probably agree with a lot of things he wanted. But it was usually no business was talked about during those times. He would do that on no business. That was not a business time. He would do that on the train too. So again, just the sort of traveling White House. What is my time? I'll keep going. I don't have my time up. Oh my, yeah. Sorry about this. I've gone on way too long. And we're just getting to the Ferdinand Magellan. I'll rush through the Ferdinand Magellan. That was the car. When the war started, things did change. He no longer left out of Union Station. A special car, it was determined they needed a even more special car. So they took one of the Explorer series and they retrofitted it, armor-plated it all the way around, installed bullet-resistant glass. And it was used all the way up through Eisenhower, although plane began to take over during that, and he didn't use it that much. This was the car that the famous Truman's Whistle Stop Tour occurred on with the, he holds up the Dewey defeats Truman. So this was a famous car. You can see this car at a railway museum south of Miami. This is so cool to go through because it was specially outfitted with FDR in mind. The corridor down the side, which is usually a set size so that the sleeping compartment could have the adequate bed length and so forth, it was widened. And they built a special wheelchair, which is still in the car, so that he could more easily move up and down the corridor. And it would fit through the train doors, and the corridor would have a little more room for maneuverability on there. So, and it also had a lift on the rear platform that would take him up and down too. So and there are handrails more so than you would see elsewhere typically on a train. As you know, you just it's everybody for themselves as you're walking along a train car when they're moving. And you see again, it has your standard, it had connecting bedrooms. There's a connecting bedroom even for Eleanor Roosevelt. She didn't really care for trains. She rarely went on the presidential train except during campaign times. She liked to fly. And she was too busy for the train, right? She wanted to be where she was going. And so she loved to fly. He would fly, but only if necessity required. And you would see they had better service facilities on the left side up there where the Pullman and Secret Service and others would use it. So let me go through. And you can see here on this picture from the Rail Museum, I took this one, you can see all the rivets from the armor plating that's been had in the windows. They do a great job. They hang what the windows look outside. They're multi-ply bullet resistant glass. They're like that thick. It's remarkable that you can even see through them without any distortion, really. It's really amazing. It weighed the train to a comfortable 285,000 pounds for the car alone. It was 5/8-inch armor plate, 2 escape hatches, one in that back lounge and one in his bathroom. It had a new public address system, telephone service that could be connected from outside the car, as well as hatches to provide ice and other necessities to control actually the air conditioning and operations that could then be sealed and couldn't be accessed again unless it was popped from the inside. So it was all designed for security. And then the new platform, it was a bureau engraving, it's still there. So that would accommodate it, so it would provide for private and secure accessibility for the president. He wouldn't go to Union Station. He would go right there and get the train from there. And this is one of the routes on he took multiple wartime inspection tours. Here's one route. This one took them down into Mexico where he met the president of Mexico briefly. And he's going everywhere, and he's looking at military bases and factories and everywhere. And I pulled the logistics files yesterday. It's unbelievable how much they were constantly changing, how long they were be someplace, how many cars needed to be there, what kind of car was it, when was it last serviced, everything you can possibly think of so that it would go smoothly. It's all there in the papers. The letter of commendation because some soldiers saw that the hatch was loose for the ice, and he pushed it closed. He just thought it shouldn't be open. That didn't seem to be correct, and he told an agent, but the train had begun pulling out. So they stopped the train and they affixed it. And he got a letter of commendation because if it had fallen open, all the ice would have spilled out, air conditioning would have failed. It was a sealed car. You couldn't open the windows. So it was like he saw something and he said something. So, again, not a new concept. And then you just get a sense of a published itinerary, not the one that's behind the scenes, and a sense of the interior today, and a black and white picture from the area. You've got your lovely, solid carved mahogany table. He would usually take his meals up in the observation car, not around the table. Sometimes he would, but he'd like to trade generally. But his staff could meet there, rolling conference room. And you see his bedroom with a little wheelchair. There that could be used to move him around, as well as his toilet right there in the room, because the older he got, his maneuverability obviously lessened as his health failed. And then you see the back room, the observation room, the furniture was changed. It was last used by Ronald Reagan on a rail tour, and so they changed out the rear car, that observation room, living room furniture for that. But everything else in that train is original. It's remarkable, train and that car. So again, go to it if you get a chance. It is really cool. And then I'll just close with one president. He gave his 4th acceptance speech for the Democratic nomination from that car, from that observation room. While on a military tour, he was in San Diego at a naval base and did it from the train. You can see his health had obviously begun to fail seriously. And then I'll close. I don't like to close with the funeral train. Go read about the funeral train on your own. I don't want to talk about the funeral train. I'll talk about FDR and train travel, and obviously our good friend Fowler, his dog who traveled with him everywhere. And I'll just close by saying the president loved train travel, and he loved it for multiple reasons, but there was a real primary reason. his mobility obviously was limited. The train got him out in the country, and it didn't just get him into big cities. It got him into small towns, and it didn't just get him into the best part of big cities. Rail lines don't go through the nice part of town. They go, they go through working areas, and he liked to be able to see that. He wanted to be able to see the industrial areas, which train travel could also show you. Out west, to see just the expanse, are fields planted. What is planted? It's one thing to get reports. It's quite another thing to see it. And rail travel takes you, if you've ever gone through the West, highly encourage it. You go through places where the road isn't following the track, and you're seeing unbelievable, beautiful natural vistas, which would encourage you to want to conserve and preserve them the way he would want to. Rail travel connected you with the country in an entirely different way than train trips did. It connected you in him in a way where he could see and get a sense, meet local people, just get even somewhat closer connection with people out there that he might not otherwise have had. And then I would argue that any president who flies around doesn't get, in a way, right? And one quick story, there were a lot of, there were prison camps for German and Italian prisoners of war that were captured. They were brought over here and they were put in camps around the United States. There were many down south. And there's a letter back from a young German man who was being sent to one in Mississippi, but it's coming from the Northeast. And he writes in a journal he kept, because he couldn't send it home, he couldn't send that kind of letter home, that he knew on the train that they had lost the war, because he said there's no way our country would ever overcome the factories he saw along the rail line, or the fields of food, the fields of grain being planted that he could see from the train. And so I think that's what FDR saw too. You got a sense of where we were from those train trips. So there, I'm sorry, wow, an hour could have kept going. So thank you. I don't know if you wanted questions.
Anybody got questions?
Questions? I don't know if I'll be able to answer. Don't ask me a rail car number or a type of car. Yeah.
The train station in Manhattan at a hotel.
Oh yeah, I knew that was going to happen. It's the fact that there was a siding there under the Waldorf is real. There was a siding there, and you could use it. But there was the car that was sitting out there for so long was not a passenger car, and it was not a car from one of his trains. It was a baggage car, and it's now somewhere in maybe. There you go. Even I give them credit for full transparency. I believe the description of it online is thought to have been a train that was there, but the story wasn't. And actually, one of my predecessors at the library went down when that story really got legs, and they looked at it and went down under there. And it's, when you go in and now to Grand Central, you see how kind of creepy it is down there. To be off the track down there, I'm sure was really creepy. And it's a great story, and there's there's kernels in there, but the car itself wasn't. Yeah.
Makes sense to be
Any stories about this rail line with this bridge in FDR's time?
Well, other than usually it wasn't used, it was coming across, but when it was for the hypersecurity of the war, and otherwise, it would have been checked like any other bridge. When he would come up on the eastern side, he did not like coming up on the eastern side because he didn't want to go through New York City and go through the greater complexity of the tracks, the security, the switches, the delays that would occur, even for a through train like the President's. Once you come under the tunnel and you're under Manhattan, it becomes a whole different world to come out on the other side, which it would, and take the tracks that the New York Central ran up through here. Of course, the funeral train came up on this side as well, and pulled off on the sidings for the troops in the coffin before going on to Hyde Park. The Royal train came up on this side of the track too when it came up, and often the trains with guests would detrain right here if they came over from the west side, which was rare it wasn't as common for a passenger train to come from over there. That was more generally freight. They would disembark them here at the Poughkeepsie station down the hill. What's fascinating is we have home movies of Franklin D. Roosevelt Jr. filming home movies with his camera at the Poughkeepsie train station waiting for, I think, Crown Princess Martha to get there. We've got those films, and we actually just found them. They were there, and it was in a box labeled, but no one, there's so much that's still to do, and they needed conservation. We can't play 16 millimeter color film at the library anymore. We have sent them to DC, and they're being formatted, and we're going to get to see what he was taking pictures of that day, as well as who we captured, because we've got all his films, and he was up here a lot and at the White House, so we're very interested to see, and he took color pictures, color motion pictures, so we're sort of excited to see. There's a lot of, from what we could tell doing this, he was married to, his first wife was the DuPont heiress. And so there's a lot of like polo, tennis, and golf and swimming. But we're hoping that there's, the really good thing about wealthy people at the time is they took pictures, right? They took motion pictures in color. And so that's cool. And we like that. So, and 16 millimeter, that's like, quality. So anyone else?
My mom grew up in Hyde Park
Uh-huh.
during his presidency, and she said they always knew when he was there because there'd be a line of soldiers with
Oh, yeah.
guns behind the wall. All the way down.
Yeah.
And she also said that there was rumors of a secret entrance.
I'm not going to talk about that. There was a story, and we do have to be careful these days because, conspiracy theories, unfortunately, are more rampant, and that there was this secret tunnel, and it had documents in it, I will say, and I used to have really high security clearances because I worked with the first President Bush's papers, so I would never, until it's declassified, until it's formally declassified, it doesn't even matter if it's in the press, you don't talk about it. There is no secret tunnel, I will say authoritatively. And we're not allowed to glamorize. Glamorization is when I can't confirm or deny. I can confirm there's no tunnel from the house to now watch it, there be a tunnel. Lowering your faith in we are unaware, and I would be exceptionally surprised because I would think we would be aware if there were a tunnel.
Did he ever use the boat?
Yeah, he would use the Potomac sometimes, and it's interesting because you see the same sort of itinerary. The Potomac wouldn't go long distances, because it was seaworthy. It just wasn't cut out for presidential security. But the same sort of things you see for rail are for the boat too, just attaching, all the boat stuff. So I'm not a boat person, so I don't know the right words. So yeah. Yeah, he hated the security up here and didn't want it, and was constantly telling Henry Morgenthau, I don't need that many Secret Service, send them to where they're valuable, and I don't need as many soldiers up here, send them to where it's valuable. And in the library, his office is preserved as it was on the back corner of the library building, and we never closed during the war. So the exhibit galleries were open, so there would be tourists in there during the war, and he would be over in his office working, and right there, 2 doors away. And when he wasn't there, and we just installed a new thing explaining all this about his office, a sign would go up over his office door, and they would let people go in and look. So, and when he was in there working, he didn't like air conditioning, he would have his windows open. And so it's just hard to fathom that, that would be the case. There was a series of cables and electric eyes that if you snapped the cable, if someone ran through it, it would set off an alarm switch in the house. So there was security, but not at all like and you can still see some of these metal bollards on the property that had these wires that ran through them that if you broke through, it would set off the alarm, but just a different era. Yeah, it is. Actually, it very much is. Our presidential library is very modest when you compare it to others, as well. So we like that. Granger's in the ideas, not the building. So, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks for having me.
Amazing.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you.